right, you guys. I feel like, well, I wouldn't say that you guys told me that this is like the most anticipated or highly anticipated episode, but the moment that I very lightly teased about this on social media, I was bombarded with questions, and no, it's not about a boy. I want to talk to you guys about hiding my business from my family. Not just the decision to do it, but also my decision to finally tell them. Okay, so there's a lot of complexity to this, but I really wanted to address this because if there's any clickbaity shit that I've ever put on social media, there's only been two things ever. One is I've gotten every job that I've ever applied for, which is true, but people really liked that little hook on TikTok, so we went a little crazy. We used that one a couple times. The other one was, when do I tell my parents about my $1 million business? And yes, that was a hook for clickbait, but it actually was a legitimate question because I wrestled with this, you guys, for basically 2 years. I started my official first business. You guys know I started in financial coaching. I started that towards the end of 2021. And at the time, I was working a full-time job. And so my parents didn't know anything besides my full-time job. So keeping that and the beginning pieces of that was very easy. The hardest thing, though, was when I decided in August that year, about 8 months later, to quit my job and not tell them then. Because if you guys know anything about withholding information from anyone, lying to anyone, whatever you guys want to call it, I guess you guys can shit on me for lying. Once you do it, you just kind of don't know when to get out of it. And I'm not necessarily someone who lies very often. Like if someone asks me a question, I'm pretty direct about it. But there is something to be said about how freeing it was to kind of keep this secret to myself and just enjoy it for myself. And obviously my friends knew, but this has been a journey. So I actually wanted to break this down for you guys in kind of a never before discussed situation, setting, if you will, because I've only really given you guys the highlight reel so far about this. And I thought it would be helpful to break it down. So let's go back to early stages of Ashley's life, where I'm going to be very honest. I think the combination of fear around telling them, or the fear around telling them, came from a combination of I always really struggled with feeling validated by my parents in any situation, regardless of I was crushing it at something or not succeeding at something, and also just the fact that like I cannot let people down. And anytime I'm going to have a difficult conversation with someone or talk about something that maybe is not so comfortable, I always play every scenario in my head because I want to go into a situation knowing what the worst case scenario is so that if it happens, I'm prepared for it. And if something better happens, I'm like, all right, I can chill the fuck out. And I don't know if anyone else does that, but with my parents, anytime I've ever had a conversation with them, I have had to go in pretty much preparing for the worst. So I have always been very uncomfortable talking to my parents about anything. I mentioned a little bit in like earlier episodes about my relationship with my parents and struggling there. It's not necessarily because of anything specific that they have done. I guess some pieces of it I would say they've done, or, you know, I could assess blame for them, but something about being raised in a household where the norm of you go to school and you do this and you get a good job and you get a high paying, you know, career, and watching that come to fruition and finally getting validated by my parents gave me so much joy that breaking that at any point literally like broke my soul. And when I say like broke my soul, I have really struggled with this topic so much more than I think I've ever given any credit to, until this year when people started calling me out on my shit, and then I had to kind of start addressing it. But I basically started my business. I scaled it very quickly. I decided that I was going to quit my job. And at the time, because I was so new, it made sense to me to not necessarily bring my parents in on this because I had only had a couple months history of success and I could get away with it for probably a little while. So I was like, you know what? We're just going to not tell them. And my plan was always to tell them once I hit $1 million. So I start the business, I'm scaling it quickly. I basically double my full-time salary in about 4 or 5 months, which is insane. And I'm wrestling that summer with, I want to quit. I am going to take my friends on this all expense paid trip. This is going to be freaking amazing. And we get to August and I quit my job, and that Vegas trip was literally so fucking horrible in every way, shape, and form. I go back to that all the time and I'm like, how did all that shit just go so wrong? But that trip was such a mess. And also at the time, I don't tell a lot of people this, my sales that month were the worst they had been in the business. So I'm sitting there, I get done with this Vegas trip and I come back. My friend now tells me she has COVID. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm unemployed. And that was such a low moment for me because I had worked my little ass off to get the business where I wanted it to be. And I took my friends on this trip and I felt like I was like having my Sarah Blakely moment. And now my friends are all fucking exhausted of me and I'm out for $18,000 and I have no job. And I had just come a year and a half prior from a job that was going to make me a ton of money, that my parents gave me a lot of validation for because it was sales and they saw my W-2. And there was just so much validation around that security that when it all felt like it was taken away from me, which was self-inflicted, but felt like that in the time, I was like, I cannot tell my parents that I failed. I have to like get back up to success and then I'll tell them. And so this is where the spiral of once I get here, it's time became. And I think every single person in the world has had this in some regard, whether it's once I hit here, I'll scale the business, or once I get here, I'll apply for this job. Like we always tell ourselves once we get somewhere that that's the moment when we're going to invest in the next thing or do the next thing. And it's all a fucking lie that we're telling ourselves we need to shut the fuck up because it's not true. So I quit my job and then I basically start scaling her 7-figure story. It's going really well. Things are starting to work out, but I am just in a state of so much exhaustion that I kind of just don't want to talk to anyone or do anything. And I'm like, I'm just going to like let this breathe for a second and I'm going to just keep scaling it and then I'll figure out the parent thing. Around that time, I also decided to launch By the Blazer, which was another undertaking in itself. I decided at that time that I was going to start business consulting, and transparently, running 2 businesses is 50 times harder than running one. So that added a lot of like new complexity. I was burnt out. I was tired. Also at that time, my friends were, transitioning into a different phase of their life. My one friend was pregnant. A couple months into that, I found out my other friend was pregnant. A couple months after that, we found out that her son had a heart condition. So I'm literally like navigating all these moving parts. And I'm like, I just don't have the fucking time or energy to bring my parents into this and sit them down. And so in my head, I'm thinking, I just am not ready yet. What's actually happening inside of me is it became this big secret. Like I had a neighbor, actually, my parents' neighbor reached out to me. She followed me on social, had no idea. Her kids actually found me on TikTok. And she's like, I'm so proud of you. How are your parents like navigating your entrepreneurship? And I was like, they don't know. So now my parents' neighbors know. People at like my church who know my mom knows. All my friends know. Some of their parents know. Like it's this whole big fucking thing. And what's so crazy is about a year later, so now I've kept this secret for a full year. About a year later, I hit $1 million of revenue. And I remember so distinctly in that moment being like, who do I call? Because when something really good happens in your life, you always want to be able to call someone. At that time, I wasn't dating anyone. And talking about money with my friends has always been like, do I do it really transparently? Do I not do it? Like there's always kind of been a wrestling there. But I remember being like, I wonder how many people when they hit this moment in their life or in their careers, like they call their parents, be like, I did it, mom. I did it, dad. And I sat there and I'm like, I don't think that they would see that as an I did it, because I lied about it and I've done this behind the scenes and I didn't ask for my dad's opinions on it. And I just wrestled with this so much that then the $1 million wasn't good enough either. There was no, I've hit this new milestone in my business that I can just accept that I've done this and I can tell them. And so a lot of people ask about how I was actually able to keep this secret. So I do want to give a little bit of context there, but I do want to clarify that for about 6 or 7 months, I never felt like I was really lying, because I wasn't actually not answering a question correctly or truthfully. So my parents would say, how is work going? And I would say, it's good, which was not a lie. It was good. But obviously, like they're thinking corporate job, I'm thinking business good. And then they would say like, are you traveling for work anytime soon? I'm like, nope, I don't have any travel coming up. So for a long time, it didn't feel necessarily like I was withholding anything. Or I guess lying. I felt like I was withholding something, but I didn't feel like I was directly lying. It wasn't probably until almost a year in where my dad started saying like, how's X company? How's this company? And he's asking me direct questions about my job. Like, remind me what department you oversee. Like, how is the business going? Are you looking at, any promotions soon? And I literally had to start making shit up in my head. And I remember at that time, my old boss had actually just left the company. So I used to be like, I report to Nina, I do this. And she left the company. I made the mistake of telling my mom that she was leaving. And I'm like, wait, I don't know who's replacing her that I can be as my new boss. And so then I was just, guys, this lie, this like withholding became so complex. And it was all my own fucking fault. And it was this thing in my head that I told myself that this was me better than telling the truth. So again, was it the right thing to do? Am I happy that I did it? I don't know if I would say I regret that I did that. It became really heavy because lying consistently to people that you want more than anything to believe in you and love on you on is like the most just horrible thing ever. And I genuinely don't do it very often. I'm kind of almost like too honest with people, probably to a fault. But for some reason with my parents, I've always felt this like very comfortability of like withholding things from them. And so when we got to launching By the Blazer, I crossed over $1 million a year later. I started to get to a point where I'm like, okay, so if $1 million was the goal, if hitting 1 million was my I've made it, they can't poke holes in the shit moment, and I'm still not comfortable to tell them, like, when is it going to happen? And what's crazy is as I continued to navigate that year, I ended up actually going to New York with one of my friends, Casey. And I remember going on this trip so vividly. We go on this trip and we're walking around and she's like, you're so anxious, you're so stressed. And I was like, well, I didn't tell my parents I'm going on this trip for a podcast. I told my parents I was going as just like a friend visit with you. And she's like, aren't you exhausted? And I remember like trying to save face, but also like just wanting to break down and cry in that moment because I was like, yes, I'm fucking exhausted. I am so tired. But I also don't know how to like stop what I'm doing. Like, I just feel like I'm in it now and I don't know what to do. And I think a lot of people, when they're like in debt or they are in like a bad relationship or whatever, I'm assuming it felt like that. It was the same for me. I literally felt stuck because at this point I'd have to basically go to them and say like, I have been lying to you. So she asked me that. And I remember at the time too, I was like navigating other personal things and she's like, we should go see a psychic. And I'm like, okay. And so we walk into this really creepy ass fucking building and we're sitting down and talking to this woman and she's like, yeah, I can do this full reading for you. And she sat down and basically exposed the fuck out of me for a solid hour. She talked about like my fear of relationships. She talked about my parents, but this is what was really interesting. And this actually gave me a lot of clarity in navigating this. She said, you have a very difficult relationship with one of your parents. And I was like, oh yeah, my dad. And she goes, no, your mom. And I remember thinking like, my mom, if you ask anyone in my life, my challenging relationship has always been with my dad. My dad has always been really tough on me. He's always had very high expectations of me. My mom's been a little bit more chill in my life. And the moment she said that, there was this like light bulb moment where I'm like, I am more afraid of telling my mom than my dad. And I want to give like a little pause here to give a little bit of context to my parents. My dad has always liked me making money. He's always liked security. But what's so interesting and what adds a very complex layer to this whole thing is over the last couple of years, when I've started to make good money and be successful, my dad has started to ask me, like, when are you ever going to start a business? When are you going to become an entrepreneur? When are you going to do this? And so you'd probably think, Ashley, what the hell? You should tell him because clearly he's like already going to be supportive. My fear around that was like, him not liking the way I did things. The fear around telling my mom was the fact that she was going to be like, this is risky and this is not safe. And I don't know how you're going to navigate this because I didn't ever feel like my mom believed in me. I felt like my dad believed in me if I did it his way. I felt like my mom actually just never believed in me. And so when she's sitting there telling me that I have this difficult relationship with my mom and there's this barrier here and this pain here, I was like, oh my God, no wonder this is so heavy. I literally feel like my mom is going to like sit around having a fucking heart attack because she doesn't believe in me. And my dad's going to sit around having a heart attack because he can't control the narrative in the situation. And my fear wasn't about telling them. My fear was about them navigating and processing now how I was running my life and running my income and running a business and what comes with that. And them just sitting around waiting for something bad to happen or waiting for me to tell them that it was going to be okay. And the financial and personal responsibility and just business responsibility that I was going to have to expose them to more consistently to keep them from like freaking the fuck out on me. And that was so eye-opening to me because I couldn't figure out. I was so fucking scared to tell them. But that was really it. And then I started to have flashbacks to conversations with my mom where I remember when I was at the sales job, I hated it so much that in the last year, I actually ended up getting my real estate license. And I really wanted to flip houses, but I also was kind of being convinced by one of my really amazing friends that maybe I should go into real estate. And I remember getting my real estate license, and my mom actually called one of my friends to be like, please convince her not to go into real estate. It's too risky. And I got so fucking angry she did that because I'm like, how dare you call my friends to tell them for me not to do something when have I ever failed you? Like, I don't understand how you could possibly be so afraid of me failing. And then I remember telling my grandma one day that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. This was many years ago. And she's like, that seems really hard, Ashley. You don't want to do anything like that. And I just feel like there's always been these voices just being like, it's hard, so don't do that. Or something bad could happen, so don't do that. And there was a sadness around that, but there was also an anger. So at this point, I was like a month from hitting $1 million. I knew it was going to happen very soon. And I think between the, oh my God, I just made it and I can't tell them, I'm still so scared. And also the anger around like, you don't think I'm fucking good enough to do this. It just kept me from wanting to tell them. So we're now a year plus in. And every single month after that meeting with that, would you call her like she's not a shrink. She would be like a psychic, I guess. I don't know why I'm calling shrink and psychic. They're definitely not the same thing. But I'd never met with a psychic, by the way. Highly recommend to do it. It's just fucking fun. Even if you like don't feel like she exposed the shit out of you, I will say you should just do it. And doing it in New York was just like a whole other layer of fun and experience. And doing it with your friend, taking notes in the background, also really fun. But after that, I was really struggling in my business, just like trusting my gut. It wasn't necessarily like sales were down. And my business coach actually ended up making me meet with her mindset coach. She's like, hey, like I'm going to have you meet with this mindset coach and do this. And I remember in the first session, she's just looking at me and she's like, so we're going to like get through some shit. We're going to like unravel some shit. I'm like, okay, yeah, sounds good. Like I'm ready for it. I've been to therapy before. This will be fine. And she just starts asking me questions and I just start crying. I'm literally just crying and crying and crying. And I finally am like, yeah, I didn't tell my parents about my business. And she's like, what? What do you mean? Like, I don't understand. How can you not tell your parents? And she's like, well, no wonder you're so stressed. And I was like, no. Like, it's fine. Like, I don't mind not telling them. And she's like, no, like literally that is the number one thing holding you back right now. I'm like, God, you're the second fucking person to tell this. And then I ended up meeting with my own coach to kind of recap that. And she's like, Ashley, the number one reason you are not successful or where you want to be in regards to success is because you're holding this from your parents. It is weighing you down like a fucking weight. And so this is like October, November. I hear this from one person in October. I hear this from another person in like late November. I hear this from my own business coach in there. And all of a sudden, the weight of this starts to feel the heaviest freaking thing in the world. And so I keep navigating this. And every time I'm like lying to them or withholding it, I actually had my family in town. They came to visit because my grandmother died at the beginning of the year. And so my aunt and uncle actually came to St. Louis to visit and bring some of my grandmother's things over. And they're asking me about my job in front of my parents and I'm lying to them. And it just became this thing where I'm like, I don't know what to do anymore because I genuinely feel like I don't have a family and a piece of my like soul is missing. And I don't know where to go from here because it just felt so heavy. And it felt like also at this point, because I was losing confidence in myself, that telling them that I had this business when I was also like, oh my gosh, am I actually as successful as I think? Am I actually crushing it? Telling them that and then them feeling my lack of confidence in myself, I was like, I can't tell them now because they're going to poke holes in things and I'm going to believe them. A year ago, I wouldn't believe them. I'd be like, fuck you, I'm amazing at what I do. But now I've hit this level where maintaining it is a whole other journey. And if I fall below that, they are going to look at me and they're going to poke holes in it and they're going to convince me that I'm not good enough to do it. So this is where the kumbaya circle comes into play, because this past summer, I have felt more confidence in myself and also more questioning of myself than probably ever before. And I mentioned a couple episodes about my kumbaya circle when I went on kumbaya circle. Man, that is so hard to say. And it's also really hard to type. But I went on this retreat with a couple different business coaches. And again, when I went, I thought it was going to be really eye-opening to me to just talk about business with people that are like in it with me. Again, I thought it was me very business strategy. And as I mentioned in that episode, very much like 13 Reasons Why, where it's like one event leads to like 4 or 5 other like moving parts. The biggest thing was just like change in myself. But the second thing was I sat there with these women and they're talking about things and the pain that they're feeling and the heaviness that they're feeling about themselves or their personal lives or things that have happened in their past. I kind of felt like a fucking loser. I'm sitting there and I'm like, first of all, these women have a lot bigger businesses than me because they're like 4 years ahead of me. Second, they're talking about situations, and again, to keep like their privacy, I won't talk about the details, but they're talking about things happening in their life. And I'm like, my parents loved me. They might have maybe not been as nice to me as I would have liked sometimes, but they put a roof over my head. And, you know, I see them. I live fairly close to them. Like, they're fairly cordial most of the time. Like, what the hell am I doing keeping something like this from my parents? I haven't even given them the opportunity to shit on me and make me regret doing this. I haven't even given them the opportunity. I've just told myself in my head that if I share this with them, that they are going to make it horrible, or they're going to make me question myself, and they're going to like hurt my heart, and I'm going to feel like they don't believe in me. And I'm sitting around with these women and I'm talking about hiding this from my parents. And it just was so interesting how they're looking at me and they're like, I don't know how you did that. And I don't know how you're doing it now. And I was like, I don't know how to, I don't know. You're absolutely right. And so there was such a shift in me that weekend, you guys. I cannot explain how much that weekend completely changed my life. The way that I feel about myself, the way that I look at things. Like I felt so overwhelmed. And so I got done with that retreat on a Sunday. I got home that Sunday night and I just felt this like, I can do this, but something is keeping me from doing this. And so I navigated that Monday. I was getting back to the swing of things on Monday, back into work. That Tuesday, that Wednesday, and something in me really shifted like that Wednesday where I'm like, maybe I tell them. And I just kept saying like, maybe I tell them, maybe I tell them. I was kind of like telling myself that that's what I need to do. And I'm having these moments and I'm having these thoughts. And then on Thursday, I actually have a meeting with my business coach. And I remember this conversation so well because I look back and I'm like, I swear to God, I hope no one ever sees this recording because I looked like a fucking lunatic. So we get done with this retreat. I'm in like this kumbaya, like I'm a woman, I'm amazing, like I can attack the world, like Leo energy is coming because we're almost in August, like all these feels, right? And I'm just living and breathing that week. I'm like, I'm just feeling, I'm just existing. And we get to Thursday and I hop on this call and we go straight into like business strategy. Like, hey, I have this idea for this and this and this and this. And I like reject it. It literally, I'm trying to think of like when you do something and just like it just like doesn't work. Like I was water and she put oil on me and I was like, absolutely fucking not, get the hell away from me. I just can't even describe how I felt in that moment. We just go straight into strategy, straight into this. And I'm like, I'm in my bubble, bitch. I'm in my bubble. I'm just in the feels. Like, let me be. And she's like, I feel like are you okay? And I could not pinpoint it, but I felt like sick, like not physically sick. I felt like emotionally ill. I felt like every part of me was like processing all these things from like the last couple years. And every single emotion in me just like completely released in that moment. So I get off my call with her. That's happening all afternoon. I actually end up taking a nap because I'm so overwhelmed. I can't even function. I don't know if anyone else does that. When you're really overwhelmed, you just like take a nap to like chill your body down. I take a nap and I wake up and I'm like, I have to tell them. Like, that's all I did. I literally just had this moment where like, I have to tell them. I have women sitting in a kumbaya little fire circle, throwing paper into a fire of things that are releasing. And I just wrote down my parents' name I threw it in a fucking fire 4 days ago, and I haven't done anything about it. Shame on me. That's how I felt. So I didn't really process like what was going to happen next. I just felt that like feeling inside of me, like, okay, I need to just share with them. And that Thursday night I went to bed and I woke up on Friday. I had nothing on my calendar. And I remember I texted my mom in the morning. I said, hey, what are you and dad doing today? That's all I did. I didn't even really have a plan. I just was like, what are you guys doing today? And she's like, oh, well, your dad's going to probably nap at this time and I'll be home all day. And I was like, awesome. Maybe I'll stop by at like 11 o'clock if that's okay. I want to remind you guys that I was in Canada that prior weekend for a business retreat. My mom asked me to come over to do something to help her. And I lied and said that I had to meet my friend for lunch. So I was like, hey, I'm so sorry. I'm going to be like with my friend. I'm so sorry. So I literally just lied to her 4 days prior. She didn't even know that I was in Canada for this retreat. She had no idea. So she thought I was like hanging out with my friends and just ignoring her, being very like MIA for a couple days. So I wake up on Friday. I have decided I'm going to go to my parents' house. I don't really have a plan on how I'm going to tell them or if I'm going to tell them. I just was like, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to like and I'm just going to see what happens. So I got so nervous about an hour prior because I was starting to think of the logistical things. Like, do I tell my mother and father separately? Do I tell them, together? Like, what do I do? So I ended up just going to Nothing But Cakes. I don't know. I just drove there. I just ended up driving there because I was like, if I bring them treats, then I have a reason to stop by because I can't just stop by to see my parents because who does that? So I stopped by Nothing But Cakes and I'm standing in line to get these bundt cakes to go over to my parents' house to tell them that I run $1 million, almost multi-million dollar company and I've hid it from them for 2 years and I've lied about it. Like, that's cool, right? That's so casual. And I'm in line and I'm so anxious. Like, guys, I'm shaking. I probably look like I'm about to pass the fuck out. Like, I'm around all this sugar. You'd think that revived me? No, I was dead inside. I'm standing in line and I go up to the woman and I'm like, I usually get buntinis or like the little ones, but I'm kind of thinking the buntlets. And she's like, oh, amazing. Like, what are you thinking? What are you liking? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think my mom likes this. And I'm like freaking out just ordering. And she's like, how many do you want? I can't answer any questions. Like, I'm just kind of in this state of like anxiety. Anyway, another woman walks in behind me and I'm like, well, fuck, I need to figure out my shit because she's going to stand behind me and she doesn't want to wait 40 minutes for me to order these things. So I order like the buntlets. By the way, if you guys have never been to Nothing But Cakes, it will change your fucking life. Nothing But Cakes is the best. So I'm standing in line. I'm getting my bundt cakes. She's ordering them. And she's like, what type of little card thing do you want on it? Because at Nothing But Cakes, please sponsor me, by the way. I love your shit. But I wanted one of the cards that just said like, just because or whatever. Because she goes, is it congratulations? Is it just because? I said, well, I don't really know what it is. And she's like, okay. Like, guys, this poor woman, like, I need to go find her. I think her name was Cheryl. Cheryl, I love you. She gets like the little thing. She puts like the just because. And she's like, oh, like, are you just, who are you bringing these to? I was like, oh, I'm bringing it to my parents. And she's like, oh, I wish my children would just stop by on a random Friday to bring me goodies. And I go, well, to be fair, I've been keeping a really big secret from them. I'm about to drop a bomb on them. So that's why I'm bringing them stuff. And she goes, oh, okay. Like, she didn't know what to say. What does she say? Poor Cheryl. I think it's Carol or Cheryl. Anyway, she was amazing. The lady behind me then is like, oh my gosh, like, that's amazing. Like, I hope it goes well. Well, apparently Betty, I don't know her name. We're just going to call her Betty. She became my best friend because I'm in Nothing But Cakes. By the way, I've been handed these for another 25 minutes talking to this woman. I'm like, yep, I run a business and I've been keeping it from them and I don't know how to tell them and I'm afraid they're going to reject me. And then I had a therapy session in Nothing But Cakes. I didn't know what to do. And this woman was waiting for her order. It was more like a custom order or something. So she was standing there anyway, but she's standing behind me and I'm spewing this whole thing out on her about how my parents reject me. And she's a mom and she looks at me and she's like, your parents will be so proud of you. And I was like, oh my God, I needed that so bad. Like, I literally just like everything. I was like, it's going to be okay. Thank you to, I don't know, her name's Betty. She doesn't look like a Betty. She's like one of those traditional like town and country ladies who are in like yoga pants and have perfectly flawless hair in the middle of a Friday when she probably has already like gotten her kids ready for school. I don't know how the town and country moms do it. But anyway, she was a God gift from above. And she looked at me and she's like, your parents are going to be so proud of you. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I did not think I was going to cry, but here we are. So I grabbed my buntlets. I have, by the way, like enough for 25 people, but it's fine. I grab them and I drive over to my parents and I cry. And I was like, you know what? If they're not proud of me, it doesn't get any worse than how I feel right now. It doesn't get any worse. So the worst thing that I can do is keep fucking going and never know what it's going to be like for my parents to look at me and say, you did it, kid. We knew you could. We believe in you. Whew. And so I get in my car. I'm driving. I pull up to my parents. When I get there, thrown in the fire of the complexities of doing anything like this where you don't really have a full plan. My dad is asleep. So I'm like, fuck, what do I do? My mom's alone. And I just decided at that point that I wanted to tell them together. And so my mom and I are talking and I go into straight Ashley Bennington is a fucking liar mode where I don't talk about myself. This is how I got away with this for so long. Instead of talking about myself, I told stories about my friends. Like my mom would be like, how are you? I'm like, oh, well, I just saw Abigail and Abigail's doing well and Micah's doing well. I'll be like, oh, I babysat Nora and Nora's this big. Or like, you know, like my mom knows Nora's weight. She knows like how tall she is. She knows how many teeth she has. She knows all of my friends' birthdays. Like she knows everything about my friends because they basically default to talking about my friends. So I went into like comfort zone mode. And for 30 minutes while we waited for my father to wake up from his nap, I'm just sharing everything about my friends. Well, then my dad comes down and he's like, I'm so excited to see you. I've kind of missed you. And I was like, you what? My dad has been going through some medical things, by the way. And so he has been kind of like navigating that on his own. So I haven't seen them very much, which is pretty normal. I don't see my parents very often because, again, we don't have like a very solid relationship necessarily. It's not bad. It just isn't great most of the time. And so I haven't seen them very much, probably for like 2 months at this point. And so my dad's sitting down, he's telling me how things are going with some of his stuff going on. And yeah, he looks at me and he goes, I've kind of missed you. I was like, I've missed you too, Dad. And in that moment, I just wanted to like hug him, which was also very not normal for me. Like I was just like, I think it's because I was so nervous and I was like, I'm about to tell my daddy something. Like I want him to be proud of me. So he says that to me and he's like, I'm sorry I've been talking about myself so much. Like, how are you doing? I feel like you've had a lot going on this year. Like you've had all of your friends in hospitals and these kids and just all this stuff. Like, how are you doing? And at that moment I was like, this is it. I'm going to tell him. So I kind of transition into, well, actually you're right. It's been really hard. And that's actually one of the reasons that I'm here is I realize how hard things have been. And it's been very difficult for me to communicate how I've been feeling and what I've been processing probably for the last like 3 years. And that just gave me not like, you know, this is about technical things of like how I brought this up to them, but it kind of just gave me this natural segue because one, my dad very rarely asked me like how I am in that regard. Like it was in a very like loving place, which is not usually how I feel like we talk. And so I just go and I basically say the entire last 3 years of my life. I was like, I was at this job and I hated it. And when I left, I think I had an identity crisis. And then I'm starting at this job and I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so that's what I told them. I said, I started promoting that I, know about social media and I've been learning social media and I started getting clients and this, and my parents are just kind of staring at me. And I was like, and 15 months later, I made $1 million. And my mom is listening because I'm starting to cry at this point. Because I mean, this took like 30 minutes to go through. And the moment I said I made $1 million, my mom starts clapping, which I know it sounds so silly, but she literally just starts clapping and she's like, that's so amazing. And my dad's looking and he's still kind of stern. So I'm like, oh fuck, okay, it's fine. It's gonna be fine. He'll get there eventually. And of course my mom at that time, she had a customer come. So she had to like go upstairs. So my dad's just sitting there and he's looking at me and he's like, okay. And he's like, so everything's good. Like you're doing a good job. Like you've been figuring it out. I'm like, yep. And he's like, so what do you do exactly? And he's asking me all these technical. And he's like, why were you so afraid to tell us? And he goes, actually, and this was like probably one of the, I don't know what I could call it a highlight moment of my life, but it was so insane. He's like, actually, I know why you hid it because I've never really been very honest with you. And if I'm always not being honest with you, how am I ever going to expect you to be honest with me? And I'm like, holy shit, he gets it. And we basically spend the next like 20 minutes. My mom comes back down. They're asking me some more technical questions. Like, what do you, so they're like, oh, you're like a consultant. And I'm going through kind of, they're like, why would people resign with you? They're asking a lot of like technical things about like, just the business. And I'm going through all this. And I just remember in that moment, I was like, this is good. This is okay. This is not scary. The scariness has like left my body and this is okay. And, we proceeded to talk about a lot of different things that day. And I was probably there for a solid 3 hours, which also was like the most emotionally draining and also the most fulfilling thing in my entire life. But they didn't ask anything. They didn't poke holes in anything. They didn't ask a lot of like really crazy questions. But my dad, at one point, kind of when I finally like wrapped up, he looks at me and he's like, Ashley, I've always believed in you. I've always known that you can do it. And he's like, I'm really sad that you felt like you needed to keep this from us. But also, if you needed to do that to prove to yourself that you could do that, like, I'm glad that you did. And there's not like let me now transition to the lesson of this whole story of like, tell your family, let them in, tell your friends. It's not really about that. I think the thing that I am the most emotional about right now and the thing that feels the heaviest, because I'm kind of like now reliving it, because I haven't really told the story in so much detail since it's happened. I've just been like, people are like, how'd it go? And I'm like, really good. They were so supportive. And I've kind of just left it because I cannot emotionally like go through this again, because it was so much heaviness that I literally had to release from like 3 years of my life. So it's not about the lesson from this. I just want to like tell you guys that, in life, you get the option to tell people and let them then show you how they feel about what's happening in your life, whether it's friends or family or whatever. I made the decision last year to start telling my friends about my financial successes. And I'm sure at some points there's probably been like pain there or frustration there. But I also like the moment that my friends threw me a $1 million party, and every entrepreneur that I've ever met sent me a message and said, my friends would have never done that for me. They don't get my business. I don't share those things with me. I'm afraid of what they're going to think. And I'm like, my friends are different. My friends will celebrate me and look at me as the same person, whether I'm making $100K a year, $50 a year, or 20 billion. Like, they don't look at me different because they don't care about what's in my bank account. They care about the person I am to them. And all my entrepreneur friends started then sharing things with their friends, and it's like completely changed their friendship. And I'm like, if I can be that with my friends, why can't I make that with my family? And so the last thing that we had talked about that day is I brought up a couple other things that had been happening in my personal life at that time. And my parents were like, okay, this is exciting. And I remember I looked at them and I said, I know that we always haven't had the most amazing relationship, but I'd really like to prioritize that now. I really think like we can be better together. I think that we can, have a good relationship. I think we can talk about things more. I think we can be more open with each other. And my parents look at each other and look at me and they're like, that would be really nice. And I left that not just releasing this like secret or like sharing or finally being vulnerable with them. I left and I was like, my parents can actually be a blessing in my life, and it can be a good thing in my life. And a lot of people really struggle with their families. A lot of my friends have had interesting relationships with their parents. I'm not saying that me and Mark and Cindy are, starting our own Kumbaya circle or like our own club or, we're getting matching tattoos or anything. But, the people that are in our life hold so much weight in the way we feel and the way we operate and what we do and what we believe in ourselves. Like, I know that I am a better person because of the people that I have in my life. I know that I'm a kinder person because of certain friends. I know I'm a happier person because of certain friends. Like, all my friends have really kind of formed who I am. And for a lot of you guys, even if your parents aren't necessarily people that you talk to every single day or the closest people, they still hold a lot of influence and a lot of weight. And if that strain, if that relationship is heavy, or if it's with a friend or whoever, if that relationship is heavy, it weighs you down. And I'm not saying that you should be open with people so that you can feel better about yourself. But I want you to remember that if you're going to choose to have people in your life, like, what type of relationship do you want there? What type of feeling do you want there? When your parents call you, do you want to be like, fuck, I have to make an excuse of where I'm at because I'm in Canada with my business mentor and they don't know about it? Or do you want to be like, hey, mom, I have a meeting with Kate and I'm going to be having this call real quick. Like, can I call you back later? Like, the way that I feel about relationships in my life and my ability to control them, not in a manipulative way, but in a like positive way of like, I have the same ability to add love and respect in a relationship as other people do to add the negativity. I'm going to choose to make that the heaviest weight in the equation here. It's just made me feel so free. It's changed the way that I'm looking at my relationships with clients. I'm like, if things aren't good, bye. I don't need that. That's okay. It doesn't mean that one of us is good or bad. It just doesn't need to be the situation. If my friends don't choose to prioritize me, great. That's okay. I can move on. The feeling of like released stress and control that I have in my life, which is so funny because I actually gained more control by relinquishing control, is so much greater than I ever thought possible. And so that weekend, like I said, was such a pivotal turning point for me because now I'm approaching my business from a state of creativity. I'm approaching my friendships from a state of like collaboration. Like I'm going to be there and I'm going to be present. But the moment that someone wants to step away, I'm going to let them. I'm going to let them be. I'm looking at, what it would look like to, create a life with, a partner and a relationship with someone that I care about. And I'm like, I never thought that was something I would be wanting. I was always like, single Ashley, like I am like BDE, like I don't need a man, I don't like whatever. And it's funny because I've gotten a lot of messages recently from people who are like, I feel like you gave me so much confidence, I can do it alone, but like you understand that life is so much better together. And my entire belief around my relationships in my life have changed. And for the first time, when people ask me about my parents, like I smile and I get excited because I've put myself in a position to create that. And it's been a really long journey. And I know that not everything is like perfect because I don't think any child parent relationship is perfect because it just can't be. Like you have to be a parent and a friend and a mentor and a dictator and all wrapped in one. I can't even imagine being a parent. To my friends that are parents, like God bless you. But I just like, it's totally changed everything for me. And so I really, for the first time, felt like this was the right platform to kind of share that story. I know there's a lot of holes in it because there's a lot of things that happened in the earlier parts of my life that led to kind of this desire to withhold this from them. Obviously, the conversation I have with them, I like to keep a little bit more sacred because that was like my time with them to just be open and honest. And some of that just needs to be kept between us. And obviously, some of the things that happened that weekend and what was shared with me, those are stories that are not mine to tell. But the thing that I just want to really like leave you guys with is just how much control you have about the way you feel about the people in your life. And if people are heavy, like you get to make them light. If people are not showing you love and respect, like you get to dictate that, you get to change that. Like we have so much more control, but you actually have to relinquish control in order to gain it. And for someone who's always been a little OCD, my 8 label makers would agree with me. Like I've always liked things really organized and control, and I really struggle with that like compulsive, those like tendencies. I like to maintain order, and the feeling that I have that I am in complete control of my entire life while also feeling like I don't need to do anything to have that control is unlike any feeling that I've ever had. And so I have not told about my parents about the podcast yet. So this episode will not necessarily be shared with them. But obviously there's things that are going on between my relationship with them that has been so good and so much more healthier than ever before. And I just really wanted to give you guys the opportunity to hear this story and to kind of hear about my journey of going through this, because this has been kind of one of the most transformative experiences of my entire life. So I hope that you guys love this episode. I would love, love, love if you guys send me a quick message, if you guys resonated with this one, if there was anything that I said. I know we all have really confusing and complex and kind of dynamic relationships in our life that sometimes add a lot of good and also sometimes add a lot of bad. But if this was encouraging or sparked anything inside of you, I would love to know. So I love you guys. Thank you so much for giving me this platform to share this, and I will see you guys next week.